it's a lot easier for an outsider to come in and say something difficult to a senior executive. Hey, executive, you're a control freak.
You come in as an outsider and you're working with executives, how something as simple as RACI can get enterprise decision-making unstuck.
I actually think RACI helps us a lot with these difficult conversations because it's such a neutral language.
Here with me again is Cassie Solomon, organizational change and digital transformation leader, and also author of Leading Successful Change, 8 Keys to Making Change Work, a book that's been published by Wharton twice since 2013 and revised in 2020. Cassie, thanks for joining me for part 2.
Thank you so much, Galen. This is really fun. I'm delighted to be back.
I loved our part 1 conversation because actually we did kind of dive deep. We kind of got into some of the tactical, practical, how some of this actually works in real life beyond the theory. And it got me thinking about just, some of these conversations, some of the tough conversations that need to be had. You use the word negotiations, and we kind of arrived at this idea that, all RACI conversations, these conversations about, who's responsible for what, who has the authority to do what, they are somewhat all negotiations. So I thought maybe we could dive in here. My main thing is that, I imagine that having to tell someone, particularly someone in a position of power, that they are not authorized to make a decision or that they are only to be informed, that probably isn't an easy message to deliver. And yet you, in your work, you come in as an outsider and you're working with executives to untangle inefficiency by doing exactly that. And I was wondering if you could just step us through the process.
So first of all, I just want to acknowledge what everyone understands deeply to be true, which is that it's a lot easier for an outsider to come in and say something difficult to a senior executive than it is for an insider, because my contract is on the line, but your job is on the line. And
So,
that's why they bring in consultants to have these kinds of conversations.
Fair enough.
So I'm really humble about whether or not my wisdom is better than the internal people's wisdom, but my access is often better. So this comes up all the time because, especially the PMI is very clear that it wants us all to have a single A on every project. And the company that we were just talking about earlier, established tech company in California, really wanted to speed up its decision-making, but out of the box, they put 2 executives on every new initiative. And then the CEO said, and we want 1A for everything. We kind of scratched our chin and said, that's a little bit of a contradiction. But I'm not as zealous about the 1A. I think that our modern organizations, global, challenged, fast-paced, there are plenty of A's. The point of a RACI exercise is to have as few as possible. So if I'm trying to explain to this executive that the CEO has handed down this edict that there's going to be 1A, and you may have it for the initiative, but IT is a pretty important stakeholder. They can say yes all day long. Actually, it comes to one of RACI's deficits. It doesn't have a deadline associated with it. So let's say that IT comes to you and says, yes, of course I can reshape this part of the system to reflect what you need. And you want it, by the end of the month, and IT has got it on its roadmap for year 3. That's a pretty big discrepancy. And it's actually not about role. It's just about deadline. And a lot of those pain points end up being, especially with IT, end up being about delivery speed. But I actually think RACI helps us a lot with these difficult conversations because it's such a neutral language. And I'll use an example that's a little more in the empowerment space. I'm not going to go in and say, hey, executive, you're a control freak and you're micromanaging and you're a perfectionist. And as we said earlier, that's the working definition of empowerment. We're no longer personalizing the feedback. This is not about your leadership style, whether it's good enough or needs to improve. It's just about roles. Let's just talk the role language. Let's just go after getting rid of some of those A's that you are hoarding on your plate without. But I also think that part of what you get into with that is how do you develop your people so that you can trust them to make quality decisions? If we've just started working together, you could be the greatest manager with 20 years of experience, but if you're new to me and I've never worked with you, it is much harder for me to trust you and give decision-making over to you than if we've been through several rodeos together. So one of the things I really talk to people about is the idea that empowerment is a journey. It's not a binary on-off switch.
I wonder, maybe we could just dive into the conversation itself, you kind of in the moment, maybe just walk me through your approach.
I think of delegation as one side of the coin and initiative as the other side of the coin. And there's this awesome, really old resource called Who's Got the Monkey? But one of the gems in this article is they describe these different levels of initiative. And level 0 is wait to be told what to do.
Okay.
And level 1 is ask, how would you like me to do this? Right.
Right.
And the next level up is come with a recommendation.
Okay.
Whether it's right or wrong, just tell me what you think we should do and then get my permission. So in that scenario, that the manager or the leader still has the A. Level 4 is take action and then come back and inform on the action that you took. And then the final level 5 is where you just take over the entire role, right? And you do your job and you periodically check back in with your boss on outcomes or like problems that you're having, but you're just off doing it on your own. I think that idea of leveling is really important and it has implications for delegation and also for empowerment. So if I'm delegating, one of the things I really want to do if I'm developing you is I want to say, no, the article says no more level 0, no more level 1. Just take them away from your team. They're not allowed to do that. They must come in at level 2, which is bring me your recommendation. And even if they're completely wrong, we can have a conversation about how I view that and why I would do it differently. And so you got to kind of know the level of the person that you're delegating to in order to do that successfully. And what I see in the empowerment world, and we have developed a way of talking about this, is, people just kind of saying, I'm moralistically wanting to be a good leader, so I'm going to empower my teams and I'm going to send them off into the cross-functional deep end and I'm going to step back because that makes me a good leader. And actually what you're doing is you're kind of throwing them to the wolves and asking them to flail around in the cross-functional space where they don't know how much authority they have and they don't know how much authority their peers have. And that's where things get stuck. So what do you say if you're empowering a team or a person that is like any level of novelty, right? Even if I've worked with you for 10 years and I trust you absolutely, but you're going off to innovate and do something that we've never seen before. I've never seen it. So how do I know what good looks like? You've never seen it. So how do you know you succeeded, right? Like there are different levels of checking in on the work that are dictated by different circumstances. You check in more often if you don't have familiarity with the people. You check in more often if, God forbid, they've let you down in the past. And you check in more often if the team is brand new to each other and they don't know what they're doing and the work is novel. So seeing empowerment across that kind of shades of journey is very helpful, and it kind of liberates executives to say, I can actually give guidelines and parameters and tell people what I'm looking for. And that doesn't make me a bad leader. That makes me a good leader who's promoting more clarity. And I just want to clarify one thing. I wouldn't say I love authority as much as I love clarity. So I want my senior level executives to step in at the right time and not at the wrong time. Because where things get messed up is first the executive says, I'm such a great executive, I'm going to empower you and let you go off on your own. And then 3 months later, they come in and say, oh, wait a minute, that's not looking very good to me. That's not what I meant at all. And then they discourage people, right? That's the opposite of empowering people. That's when people say, wait a minute, I did all this work because you said I was empowered. And then you show up and tell me that all of the last 2 months was wrong. So you got to help the executives recognize their authority at the beginning to set the bumper guards, to set the conditions for success, to set in the check-ins so they're not dropping in from the sky like some weird parachute. And then you can keep the project on the track that you want to keep it on, and people don't feel discouraged when you show up.
And one of the things you said earlier is that RACI doesn't have sort of a time frame, one of the sort of shortcomings that it has. How do you make RACI solve for this idea of maybe too vague of direction at the beginning and, parachuting in with negativity at the wrong time later on?
It's just really easy to add a column to a RACI chart and put a deadline by every critical activity. I encourage people to put deadlines on decisions as well. So, and also track it. There's some second question, way harder. How do I help my executives not swoop in with their parachute at the wrong time of the project and set us all back? And I think it's coaching at the executive level, but also it's coaching at the project leader level. So if you've been burned in the past, especially by this particular executive, and you're getting a new assignment, it is 100% within your role to go to that sponsor and say, sit down, we're going to have a conversation where I just get all of your advice and all of your guidance. You got a C right now, and I want everything you're thinking. And we can, we run a checklist, like who are the stakeholders you don't want me to ignore? What's the budget? What can you tell me about the timeline? Are there political considerations I should be aware of? Just the longest conversation possible where you literally pull the bumper guards out of them. And that way there are fewer surprises later on. And you can even say, great, well, this is kind of novel work that we're doing. It's innovation work. We don't know what the outcome is supposed to look like. I'd really like to schedule a check-in with you, executive, once a month. And the executive's going, wow, I just empowered this person and they're in my office. Bothering me with all this detail that I thought I didn't have to worry about. And then they want to get on my calendar. So it's a little bit of a risk, but most of the time, even if it's initiated by the project lead, that saves a world of hurt later on down the line.
I love that tie-in with that initiative, right? Where, yes, sometimes you might, be the recipient of vague direction from a leader, but you can also take the initiative to clarify and get to that clarity, right? Like you said, we crave clarity more than authority in some cases, but I do appreciate that angle.
But I really appreciate you making the link back to initiative, because project leaders should never be passive. No level 0, no level 1, no, you told me what to do. Okay. It's all like, this is how I recommend we work together. Let's negotiate how we're going to work together on this project, boss. And how are you going to, coordinate with the other members of the senior team when I run into trouble? Please have that conversation if they're not wise enough to have it. One of the things we're all up against, I think, is that people at the executive level really think that they agree with one another. They have these very cozy executive team relationships, and they don't recognize where they are not aligned. That shows up lower down in the organization. Greg Shea, my co-author, always says, a quarter inch of misalignment at the top is a mile of misalignment at the bottom.
That's a really interesting one, because I was going to throw a question at you to be like, in our little hypothetical scenario where you're coming to tell me that, I'm not going to be the A for this initiative that's going to IT, I was going to ask you, what do you do if I threw up my hands and flip the table over and got really mad? But actually, that's not the worst thing that could happen. I think the worst thing that could happen is the person's like, I'd be like, yeah, okay, Cassie, sure thing. And that I'm not aligned. There's that quarter inch of misalignment. What do you do then?
It's interesting, because are we talking about a negotiation with a peer or with a superior? Because they're different negotiations, obviously.
That's fair. I guess I had kind of pictured you coming in as you to tell me that a peer is going to take over an initiative or that impacts my business.
So I think what we're on is one of the complexities that our very, very simple RACI tool opens up, like Pandora's box. And what climbs out is there often are two directions for the negotiation. And one is the peer negotiation, which is the horizontal direction. And the other is with my own superior, which is the vertical negotiation.
Right.
So most of the time, I think what happens, Galen, is people say, well, you go do the peer negotiation first. Cassie, see what you can get. And the other piece of advice I would offer is, when you get to this level with role negotiation, be as specific as possible, because people tend to agree at this kind of airy-fairy 50,000 foot level. Yes, you're going to have all the resources you need. Yes, we love to collaborate with your department. At that level, we all love to look good. But if you come back in and say, can I have this change, to this part of the program by the end of July? Whoa, right? No. Now you're upsetting my apple cart. So I often advise people to get very specific in what they're asking for as they do those peer negotiations. And if you fail at getting consent, I can't do that specific thing that you need by the end of July, but I can do it by the end of September. That's not a bad outcome. Maybe that's realistic. Way better than what you're describing, where I bobblehead you,
and
then I go off and do exactly what I want. Now you go to your sponsor and say, we are slowing down. And the reason we are slowing down is that IT can't get this piece of it done until the end of September. Is that okay with you? And if the sponsor says, sure, good job, you're done. If the sponsor says, hell no, I refuse to let this project slow down, you say, go for it. Go over to the CIO, yourself, get the priorities changed. All of these things are designed to make decision-making visible. So if you keep it at this kind of high, airy-fairy, I love to be in non-conflict with all my peers, we're keeping things kind of in the fog. We're not making them visible. The gift that RACI gives us is the opportunity to say, hey, this decision or this particular piece of the project, I'm having this issue on. And now I've made it visible and I can solve it. And it's a little bit of a variation on, I think it was Deming, right? You can't manage what you can't measure. And I don't think you can manage what you can't see and describe.
RACI is one of those things where, you can kind of get a visual on something so that we can have a conversation about it, so we can surface it, so we can arrive at clarity, but until it's visible.
But I want to say we also really like making a distinction between conflict, which I think feels personal.
Right.
Like, why isn't Galen contributing to my project the way I expected him to? He's just not taking any initiative. He's a lazy SOB, right? That's conflict. Disagreement can and should be much, much more neutral. So that neutral language allows you to have a disagreement that you can resolve, whereas conflict, which feels personal, is very hard to surface because as soon as I surface it, I feel like I'm threatening the relationship.
Right.
I don't want to be in conflict with my buddy. I'm going to need him again. And also, we went and had a beer last Friday. Like, why would I want to be in conflict with my peer, whereas disagreement is much safer?
I like that delicacy of, it's a negotiation about, hey, listen, let's have a conversation about roles and responsibilities and negotiate, either you doing more or, figuring out someone who can.
I actually recommend that people do try this at home.
You can practice.
Go home and figure out who's doing all the making dinner work, who's taking the trash out.
Awesome. Well, listen, why don't we wrap it there? Thank you so much for taking us through that.
All right. Great to be with you, Galen. I really appreciate it. Nice to see everybody in digital project management land.
All right, folks, there you have it. As always, if you'd like to join the conversation with over 1,000 like-minded project management champions, come join our collective. Head on over to thedigitalprojectmanager.com/membership to learn more. And if you like what you heard today, please subscribe and stay in touch on thedigitalprojectmanager.com. Until next time, thanks for listening.